$9 million and $5.6 million respectively. Then, because we are not collecting any fare revenue and we're not having those savings on the capital costs, the net fiscal impact trends into the negative with what we're seeing as around $2.5 to $2.6 million in net costs in FY28 through 31. Whereas scenarios 3 and 4, in which we collect fares, either $1 or $2.25, and add in the enforcement, we see the greatest positive fiscal impacts, in which scenario 3 we're seeing $17.3 million in a positive fiscal impact or negative net cost over the 6-year period, and $30.6 million in scenario 4, where we are increasing fare to $2.25. But whereas the negative fiscal impact for scenario 2, the zero fare, is over the long term, it's sort of the opposite for scenarios 3 and 4, in which the negative fiscal impact is in the short term, in which we're seeing, in which we're making those capital investments in our fare equipment. And then we're seeing returns on that in the long term, where we have made our capital investments and we're then collecting increased fare revenue due to enforcement. So that is a general fiscal summary of those 4 scenarios. Understand there's a lot of numbers in these tables. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenny. I'm going to turn it over to the department to share your rationale in getting to this point, which I've been advocating for a very long time. The numbers did not always add up for others to come on board, literally and figuratively, but we're at this place, so can you share with us the macro dynamics that got us here?
I certainly can, and I just wanted to note that this was an in-depth discussion with the executive, and we struggled with many of the pros and cons of these scenarios in making this recommendation before it was transmitted here to Council. And to be fair, I've been before this committee suggesting that maintaining a fair payment system was an important part of the long-term viability for ride-on. So I'll start with sharing some of the reasons why you might consider retaining fare collection, and many of these are highlighted by Secretary Wiedefeld in his comments. One is the regional consistency and interoperability, which is an important consideration. Fare systems also, in some systems, serve as a barrier to inappropriate or poor behavior on the vehicle, and we've seen some instances, not necessarily locally, but elsewhere, where there's been an uptick in those sorts of occurrences on transit when a fare-free system is introduced. It does maintain revenue diversity so that we're not relying on a smaller set of revenue sources. And as Mr. Kenny pointed out, there is revenue generally associated with the fare collection program. So as I mentioned, Secretary Wiedefeld brings many of these points to bear in his letter, and there's nothing in his letter that is inaccurate. Those are all reasons why you might want to consider this sort of system. To counter that, the merits of a fare-free system are also numerous. There's a lower barrier to use, so people don't have to understand a fare collection system to use the service. It improves access and opportunity, particularly for those who have to consider whether they can spend that fare to make the trip. It encourages view of transit as a public good and public resources, much like we see our roads. We don't charge a road access charge for people to access their property from our streets. There are some user fees in roads, but those are generally in the state system. It improves the speed of service. There's fewer issues with people boarding and trying to figure out how to pay the fare as they get on the bus. It reduces maintenance and equipment needs over time. These devices are not carefree. They require lots of upkeep. Even if they're new, they're in a difficult environment and they frequently require repairs. As mentioned in the scenarios, it eliminates the fare processing costs and agreements that we have to pay for processing of Metro access and smart trip payments. So there are cost savings that are significant, and reflected in the scenarios, we don't have investment in equipment up front either to replace existing equipment or with the new buses acquiring that equipment with new vehicles. So when you look at all of this, the arguments pro and con are relatively balanced. And as the chair mentioned, we've always come down to what are we talking about in terms of the costs and disbenefits of the system compared to the revenue that is generated by the system. And in the past, that revenue has been substantial and merited consideration of continuing the system. And indeed, that's the decision we've made at many points before when we've considered the transit fares. When we're looking at the situation now, the amount of funds generated through fare collection is so small that it's not matching the cost of collection and the cost of equipment replacement. So it is time to look at this with a different lens and on a policy basis and cost basis, whether it makes sense to continue. Mr. Kenny, I think, did a good job of marching through the scenarios. Obviously, there are payback periods sort of implicit in each of these scenarios as well. So in the first scenario, we would recover the cost of the investment in the fare equipment about 8 or 9 years from now. And there's a question about the durability, not the physical durability, but the durability technologically of these fare payment systems. From, I would say, the mid-1980s through the 2000s, there wasn't a lot of evolution in how transit fare payments evolved. But from the late 2000s through today, there's a lot of change. You're seeing bank card payments, you're seeing a whole variety of other systems, app-based payment. So it's a little less clear than it might have been 5 or 6 years ago that these systems that we're installing are going to live or be useful for tens of years as we would need them to be to match the life of a bus. So
set this up a little bit differently would be helpful, because I think if you read this chart and we didn't have this conversation now, it would be telling a very different story, which would be, boy, we are really getting efficient with our dollars because we're almost quadrupling the number of youth that we're serving. We barely had to spend any more money, which, you know, is not the dynamic. I also think we should think about, if it is self-reporting, either figuring out a way to get to unique youth served, or think about a different metric. Like, if that is an impossible thing to figure out, or if that will take too long to figure out, because that does seem like a level of coordination that we're not particularly close to at the moment, you could think about it differently, like hours, for instance. Because hours would be, it doesn't matter if it's unique or not. I mean, if we want to know the total number of hours, and then we can ascertain that the average number of hours after school each day for the average student is 4 hours, or whatever the amount of hours is, we can get a fairly accurate guesstimate on that. But I think that would be a more useful tool than having no idea how much of these are duplicate students or not. And the amount of hours that we're providing services is really what we're paying for in the end, right? I mean, because whether you're serving one student in multiple programs for a number of hours, or you're serving multiple students, it's the number of hours that you need the staff time and the activities and the facilities and all of that for, and that's really what the budget decision is based off of. So just a few suggestions. I appreciate we're moving in this direction. I think the data collection, the presentation of the data could use quite a bit of work, but it's an iterative process, and we're going to have to work our way through that. So appreciate it.
Yeah, great points. And then I'm going to go to Councilmember Minkton, Albornoz. Just one other point I wanted to make so I don't forget. So the public agencies versus private providers. Just tell me who's in public agencies as defined by rec. Like, who's in that bucket?
Yeah, so in that bucket,
Those are the people we actually can control a little bit. so let's start with that.
that would be, yes, public libraries, community use of public facilities, recreation.
Is MCPS included in this?
Yes.
Okay, so like if there's an EBB program, well, that's a hybrid. But if there's so there's a lot of reasons MCPS is used, their facilities are used, but they're reporting